working day, and rarely less than 2 or 3. There were so many accidents as to convince me that Beloit training for novices is a mistake from the economic point of view. The upkeep expense is vastly greater than in double command biplane schools, where the student pilot not only learns to fly in a much more stable machine, but makes all his early flights in company with a moniteur who has his own set of controls and may immediately correct any mistakes in handling. But France is not guided by questions of expense in her training of pilotes de chasse, and opinion appears to be that single command monoplane training is to be preferred for the airman who is to be a combat pilot. Certain it is that men have greater confidence in themselves when they learn to fly alone from the beginning, and the Beloit, which requires the most delicate and sensitive handling, offers excellent primary schooling for the Nieuport and Spad, the fast and high-powered biplanes which are the avions de chasse above the French lines. A spice of interest was added to the morning's thrills when an American, not to be outdone by his French compatriot, wrecked a machine so completely that it seemed incredible that he could have escaped without serious injury. But he did, and then we witnessed the amusing spectacle of an American, who had no French at all, explaining through the interpreter just how the accident had happened. I saw his moniteur, who knew no English, grin in a relieved kind of way when the American crawled out from under the wreckage. The reception committee whispered to me, "This is Pourquoi, the best baller out we've got. Pourquoi is always his first broadside. Then he wades in, and you can hear him from one end of the field to the other. Attendez! This is going to be rich." Both of them started talking at once, the moniteur in French and the American in English. Then they turned to the interpreter, and any one witnessing the conversation from a distance would have thought that he was the culprit. The American had left the ground with the wind behind him, a serious fault in an airman, and he knew it very well. "Look here, Pete," he said. "Tell him I know it was my fault. Tell him I took a Steve Brody. I wanted to see if the old cuckoo had any pep in her. When I Pourquoi? Nom de Dieu! Qu'est-ce que vous a dit? J'aime faire comme ça. J'aime mon nature avec le vent en arrière. James! The others listened in hilarious silence while the interpreter turned first to one and then to the other. Tell him I took a Steve Brody. I wondered if he translated that literally. Steve took a chance. But it is hardly to be expected that a Frenchman would know of that daring gentleman's history. In this connection I remember a little talk on caution which was given to us later by an English-speaking moniteur. It was after rather a serious accident for which the spirit of Steve Brody was again responsible. "You Americans," he said, "when you go to the front you will get the Boche. But let me tell you, they will kill many of you. Not one or two, very many." Accidents delayed the work of flying scarcely at all. As soon as the machine was wrecked, Annamites appeared on the spot to clear away the debris and take it to the repair shops, where the usable portions were quickly sorted out. We followed one of these processions in, and spent an hour watching the work of this other department of aviation upon which our own was so entirely dependent. Here machines were being built as well as repaired. The air vibrated with the hum of machinery, with the clang of hammers upon anvils and the roar of motors in process of being tested. There was a small army of women doing work of many kinds. They were quite apt at it, particularly in the department where the fine, strong linen cloth which covers the wings was being sewn together and stretched over the framework. There were great husky peasant women doing the hardest kind of manual labor. In these days of the great World War, women are doing everything, surely, with the one exception of fighting. It is not a pleasant thing to see them, however strong they may be, doing the rough, coarse work of men, bearing great burdens on their back as though they were oxen. There must be many now whose muscles are as hard and whose hands are as horny as those of a stevedore. Several months after this time, when we were transferred to another school of aviation, one of the largest in Europe, we saw women employed on a much larger scale. They lived in barracks which were no better than our own, not so good, in fact, and roughed it like common soldiers. Toward evening the wind freshened and flying was brought to a halt. Then the Penguins were brought from their hangars, and Drew and I, properly dressed this time and accompanied by some of the Americans, went out to the field for our first sortie. As is usual on such occasions, there was no dearth of advice. Every graduate of the Penguin class had a method of his own for keeping that unmanageable bird traveling in a direct line, and every one was only too willing to give us the benefit of his experience. Finally, out of the welter of suggestions, one or two points became clear. It was important that one should give the machine full gas and get the tail off the ground. Then, by skillful handling of the rudder, it might be kept traveling in the same general direction. But if, as usually happened, it showed willful tendencies and started to turn within its own length, it was necessary to cut the contact to prevent it from whirling so rapidly as to overturn. Never have I seen a stranger sight than that of a swarm of penguins at work. They looked like a brood of prehistoric birds of enormous size, with wings too short for flight. Most unwieldy birds they were, driven by, or more accurately, driving beginners in the art of flying. But they ran along the ground at an amazing speed, zigzagged this way and that, and whirled about as if trying to catch their own tails. As we stood watching them, an accident occurred which would have been laughable had we not been too nervous to enjoy it. In a distant part of the field, two machines were rushing wildly about. There were acres of room in which they might pass, but after a moment of uncertainty, they rushed headlong for each other, as though driven by the hand of fate, and met head on, with a great rending of propellers. The onlookers along the side of the field howled and pounded each other in an ecstasy of delight, but Drew and I walked apart for a hasty consultation, for it was our turn next. We kept rehearsing the points which we were to remember in driving a penguin: full gas and tail up at once. Through the interpreter, our moniteur explained very carefully what we were to do, and mounted the step to show us, in turn, the proper handling of the gas manet and the coupe contact button. Then he stepped down and shouted, "Elle est en route," with a smile meant to be reassuring. I buckled myself in, fastened my helmet, and nodded to my mechanic. "Coupe plein gaz," he said. "Coupe plein gaz," I replied. He gave the propeller a few spins to suck in the mixture. "Contact reduisez." "Contact reduisez." Again he spun the propeller, and the motor took. I pulled back my manet. Full gas, and off. I went at what seemed to me then breakneck speed. Remembering instructions, I pushed forward on the lever which governs the elevating planes, and up went my tail so quickly and at such an angle that almost instinctively I cut off my contact. Down dropped my tail again, and I whirled around in a circle. My first cheval de bois, as this absurd-looking maneuver is called. I had forgotten that I had a rudder. I was like a man learning to swim, and I could not yet coordinate the movements of my hands and feet. My bird was purring gently, with the propeller turning slowly. It seemed thoroughly domesticated. I knew that I had to pull back on the manet to transform it into a rampant bird of prey. Before starting again, I looked about me, and there was Drew, racing all over the field. Suddenly he started in my direction, as if the whole force of his will was turned to the business of running me down. Luckily, he shut off his motor, and, by the grace of the law of inertia, came to a halt when he was within a dozen paces of me. We turned our machines tail to tail, started off in opposite directions, but in a moment I was following hard after him. Almost it seemed that those evil birds had wills of their own. Drew's turned as though it were angry at the indignity of being pursued. We missed each other, but it was a near thing, and, not being able to think fast enough, I stalled my motor, and had to await helplessly the assistance of a mechanic. Far away at our starting point, I could see the Americans waving their arms and embracing each other in huge delight. And then I realized why they had all been so eager to come with us to the field. They had been through all this. Now they were having their innings. I could hear them shouting, although their voices sounded very thin and faint. "Why don't you come back?" they yelled. "This way. Here we are. Here's your class." They were having the time of their vindictive lives, and